Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into one of the absolute most remarkable transformations in modern history, how China became a superpower. I mean, going from a largely impoverished agrarian nation to a global titan, that definitely doesn't happen overnight. It's a story of incredibly deliberate strategy, massive scale, and just rapid evolution. Let's unpack exactly how a single nation completely reshaped the global economy, modernized its military, and became a dominant player in international politics in just a few short decades. Okay, let's dive into this. To trace this evolution, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the 1978 turning point. Second, becoming the world's factory. Third, education and technological innovation. Fourth, expanding global and military might. And finally, number 5, modern challenges and the future. All right, Chapter 1, the 1978 turning point. This is where we go from isolation to market reforms. To truly grasp this meteoric rise, we really have to set the stage. Back in 1949, the newly established People's Republic of China operated under centrally planned economic policies. They focused heavily on state-owned industries and collective farming. But, by the 1970s, this had led to enormous challenges. We're talking deep poverty and periods of severe food shortages. The big turning point finally arrived in 1978. That's when leader Deng Xiaoping and the government realized, hey, fundamental changes are absolutely necessary if we're going to survive, modernize the economy, and actually improve living standards. The contrast here is just fascinating. I mean, pre-1978 meant deep economic isolation and a super rigid, centrally planned system. But post-1978, Deng Xiaoping introduced reforms that literally changed the global landscape. What's kind of brilliant is the balancing act they pulled off. They maintained strict political control under the Communist Party, for sure. But economically, they flipped the script. They allowed farmers to sell surplus crops, encouraged private businesses to pop up, and crucially, they opened their doors to foreign investment. A massive piece of this puzzle was the creation of special economic zones. These were designated areas specifically established to pull in that foreign investment and get private enterprise off the ground. Shenzhen is the ultimate anecdote for this. Seriously, it went from a quiet little fishing village to this thriving, massive industrial and technological hub in just a couple of decades. It's wild. These zones completely unleashed entrepreneurship, created millions of jobs, and lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It was an unprecedented economic miracle that effectively kick-started modern globalization as we know it today. Which brings us to Chapter 2, becoming the world's factory. Let's look at how they built this economic engine. Now, what's really interesting about this era is how those 1978 market reforms directly birthed a global manufacturing boom. International companies quickly caught on that China offered this massive workforce, steadily improving infrastructure, and highly competitive production costs. So what happened? Global businesses flocked there. They shifted operations to produce absolutely everything, from the clothes hanging in our closet and the toys on your shelves to the electronics sitting right there in your pocket. This sheer, mind-boggling volume of production is exactly how China earned the famous nickname, the world's factory. This whole process created a powerful domino effect. Step 1, obviously, was shifting global manufacturing onto Chinese soil. But to support all those thousands of new factories, Step 2 had to happen, massive investments in domestic infrastructure. We're talking ports, railways, highways, the works. All that infrastructure then allowed for Step 3, which was exporting those goods highly efficiently to international markets. And that massive export boom leads directly to Step 4, generating enormous foreign exchange reserves. This newfound wealth became the absolutely crucial funding they needed to integrate deeply into global supply chains and actually pay for their next huge phase of evolution. Let's move into Chapter 3, education and technological innovation, or the brain trust. So the crucial point here is that China didn't just sit on all that wealth they generated from manufacturing. No way. They strategically pivoted those foreign exchange reserves into developing their human capital. The government aggressively expanded universities and scientific research. Millions of students started pursuing higher education in specialized fields, think engineering, medicine, computer science. And on top of that, many were sent abroad to study, eventually returning home with highly valuable knowledge and international experience. Basically, they built a workforce capable of advanced, world-class innovation. And wow, did that education boom yield massive dividends. While they definitely started out just manufacturing products designed elsewhere, Chinese firms rapidly evolved to develop their very own tech. Today, China leads the world in high-speed rail, mobile payment systems, and electric vehicles. Plus, they are pouring major research funding into things like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and even space exploration. It's a total top-to-bottom shift from a basic assembly line economy to a highly sophisticated tech-driven powerhouse. Just to put this into perspective, to really grasp the sheer scale of their modern infrastructure, just look at their high-speed rail network. It is the #1 largest in the entire world. They've got enough track to practically wrap around the globe. It perfectly demonstrates the incredible speed and momentum of their urbanization efforts. It seamlessly connects major cities, dramatically cuts down transportation costs, and really turbocharged their economic productivity as hundreds of millions of people moved from rural areas into these rapidly expanding urban centers. That takes us to Chapter 4, Expanding Global and Military Might, Going Beyond the Borders. Armed with a booming domestic economy and a highly skilled workforce, China naturally began projecting economic power outward. The Belt and Road Initiative is the absolute ultimate example of this. And this brilliantly illustrates their regional strategy. They are aggressively financing roads, railways, and ports across Asia and Africa, power plants and logistics hubs in Europe, and massive mining, energy, and telecom projects in Latin America. Financing global infrastructure at this kind of scale fundamentally deepens China's trade relationships and significantly ramps up its diplomatic and economic grip worldwide. But of course, alongside all that economic expansion comes significant military modernization. The recent decades have seen massive investments to expand and modernize their armed forces. They're developing advanced aircraft, naval vessels, and high-tech missile systems. By building what is now one of the world's largest navies, alongside really advanced cyber capabilities and a high-profile space program, which, by the way, includes lunar exploration missions and their very own space station, China is aggressively protecting its international trade routes and maritime interests while showcasing its scientific might on the global stage. Finally, Chapter 5, Modern Challenges and the Future. Let's look at the future balance. Look, after decades of rapid, seemingly uninterrupted growth, a superpower is bound to encounter some pretty complex headwinds. All that rapid industrialization took a very heavy environmental toll, leading to ongoing battles with air pollution and carbon emissions. Then, demographically, an aging population and declining birth rates seriously threaten their future workforce growth. Couple those factors with a shrinking pool of cheap labor, which is forcing manufacturing to look elsewhere, and add in intense geopolitical trade disputes with other major global powers, well, the economic landscape starts to look highly volatile. So how exactly do they maintain stability and long-term growth in the face of all that? By adapting. Because of those rising labor costs, China is actively pivoting away from cheap manufacturing, which is actually forcing global supply chains to adapt right along with them. By investing heavily in green energy, automation, digital technologies, and by really expanding domestic consumption, they are attempting to diversify. The ultimate goal here is to make their economy much more self-reliant, leaning heavily on higher-value local entrepreneurship to build resilience against any future global economic shocks. So what does this all mean for us today? We've seen how long-term planning, massive human capital investment, and highly strategic economic policies manage to transform a nation's fortunes within a single generation. From the deep poverty of the mid-20th century to a dominant economic and technological powerhouse, China has completely, undeniably reshaped global commerce and geopolitics. But with those complex challenges of demographics, the environment, and fierce global competition looming ahead, we are left to ponder the future balance of power. How will China's upcoming choices shape the modern international system? Honestly, it's a question that will undoubtedly define the 21st century. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep asking the big questions.